My name is Jennifer. I'm one of the co-hosts for this episode, along with Brooke and Isaac. Today's topic is going to be gender diversity in sports. Today's speaker is Carson Carey. He's a trans-masked photographer and visual artist based in Winnipeg. His work has been featured in the Other Skater zine, Pride Winnipeg, as well as running their own photography business. He has modeled for Terry Hofford and Ali Gonzalo. Carson has enjoyed sports recreationally throughout their entire life. So Carson, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Carson. I live in Winnipeg in the Wolseley area. I'm into photography. I'm into a few sports like basketball and skateboarding, and I'm into soccer as well. I have a dog named Badger. I have a cat named Willie. Not much else to say other than what was in the bio, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your past or current involvement in recreational or organized sports?
For sure. I've been involved in sports since I was like 5 years old. I played soccer, basketball, volleyball. I did track all throughout middle school and high school. I stopped playing sports when I was in about grade 12 because I started feeling uncomfortable in changing rooms because I was figuring out that I wasn't cisgender. When I got to college, I was still into exercising a lot. So I would go to the gym at my college, which was Red River, and it's a great gym, but I wasn't comfortable in the changing rooms there either. So I quickly stopped doing exercising there as well. Since then, I've kind of just been exercising from home when I feel the need to. And I got a dog so that I would be forced to exercise more in that way too. I'm into skateboarding currently and longboarding, and I do that fairly regularly. It's really fun, and it's a really good way to get around in my area. And I'm involved with the other skaters, and that's a really cool group, and they're really welcoming. And it's a really fun way to be part of the community for sure.
So as a trans person playing organized sports, you mentioned the change rooms as being a barrier to comfortability in organized sports. Can you expand on that and maybe talk about some other barriers as well that others may be experiencing?
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, the last time I played organized sports, I was just sort of starting to figure out who I was. So I wasn't fully aware of myself at the time yet. But I was fairly uncomfortable when I was in the change room. It felt a little bit like I was intruding, I guess, in a way. I just don't feel comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable exposing myself in that way, in that environment either. As for like other barriers, I didn't really feel anything at the time because I was still not fully aware of who I was at the time. I didn't fully realize I was trans until I was 18, 19. So I wasn't super sure of why I felt that way, like it was just like an underlying anxiety type of thing that I just felt like I can't do this anymore, but I'm not exactly sure why. And then I didn't really feel any other uncomfortableness around it. I just wasn't as good as everybody else, I guess, but that was the only thing that made me super uncomfortable with it.
If you don't mind me asking, upon being more comfortable with your own gender identity, did you feel like you could get back into the organized sports space, or did you feel like you weren't even able to like get back into it even if you had the desire to?
If I wanted to, I guess I would have to join like a rec community team, you know what I mean? Like I'd be in a both genders type of team type of thing. I don't think I could join a men's team personally because, well, I'm not as good at like soccer as your average guy that plays soccer regularly. But I also don't want to join a girls team because I would look like a sore thumb, on the field type of thing. So I haven't really tried to join any recreational sports since then, because it just feels like I would kind of stick out in any way, shape or form, but I do enjoy them in like private, like just like playing with friends or something like that.
Totally, totally.
So how hard do you think it is, from experience or just from general knowledge that you have? How hard is it for other trans kids, non-binary folks, to kind of, engage in sports that so rigidly holds up a gender binary?
It's from what I understand and what I've like learned from other trans people, it can be really hard. There's this one person that I follow. They they're a professional soccer player and they're trans, but they can't medically transition, because if they medically transition, then they can't play on the women's sports team anymore. And so all they've done is had top surgery. So that's a really big barrier for them, where they can't transition anymore because they don't want to leave their team and they don't want to try and join a different league. So I can't imagine how frustrating that must be. So they have to wait until they're just like out of their soccer prime, I guess, to start transitioning. And I don't think I could do that. That takes a lot of patience and a lot of guts to hold back on that type of step, especially when the longer you wait to transition, the longer the process will take. So like if you start transitioning when you're like 16, by the time you're 19, you're going to look like the same age as all the other 19-year-old guys. But the later you wait, the more younger you're going to look. Like to lots of people, I still look like, I don't know, like a 19-year-old boy, but I'm 23. So it all depends.
I think you bring up an interesting point, that sports isn't only, sports is defined, unfortunately, by gender and by sex. But I think you bring up an interesting point where you say that, this person, identifies differently than the team that they're on. But they've built a community and relationships with their teammates. And that's kind of a part of what sports is about. It's about building community and connecting with people with shared passions. So it's really unfortunate that trans people, and non-binary folks are forced to compromise one of those things in order to participate in the things that they love to do.
For sure. Like it takes like a lot of patience and courage. Like I can't imagine holding back on myself in that way, but you have to be super passionate about what you're doing. You have to be a good team player. You have to be like, I can't imagine having that much patience and being so connected to your teammates, and that you would put off a piece of yourself like that in order to still be part of the team.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was going to say you'd have to be very, very dedicated to your team to.
That's the word, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, very dedicated to your team to kind of put your life and your identity on the hold for the sake of the sport or the sake of your passion. I'm really curious to hear more about the other skaters. Would you be able to tell us kind of more about the organization, what they do? How did you get involved?
Okay, so it's a queer, non-binary, trans inclusionary group of skateboarders, and it's run by 3 queer women, and they have a magazine that they put out once every few months, I think it's like once every 3 or 4 months. So it's like a 3 or 4 times a year type of thing. And usually when it's not COVID times, they meet up once a week and do skating. During the winter, it's at the Edge Skate Park because it's the biggest indoor skate park in the city. And then in the summer, it's at different skate parks throughout the city. Depends on where everybody is at the time. There's a lot of good skate parks, so they travel around. And they put out the zine, and they feature all of the people who are involved in the community in different ways. Like, so they involve people who are good photographers who are queer. They feature people who are artists who are queer. They feature all the skateboarders, obviously. Like, they do photo shoots of the skateboarders and talk about that. And then they have little poetry pieces and stuff like that. And it's just a really cool way to involve the community, even if like the person who is involved in the zine isn't super good at skateboarding, like myself. Like I'm not super good at skateboarding yet, but I'm still super into it. Uh, you can still be involved in it, and they still make you feel super accepted and welcome in the community, and they make you feel like, you know, a big part of it, and they always make you feel welcome. You know, I know a lot of really awesome skate guys that skate, but they're, you know, intimidating to girls, and they're like a bit unnerving. So it doesn't matter how like welcoming they are, you know, guys are still super intimidating, you know, and girls will still be like a little bit nervous to skateboard in front of them when they're not that great at it. So it all just depends. And the community really helps somebody feel like they can be a part of it, and they make them feel like, you know, even if you don't know how to yell all yet, you can come and they'll teach you, and they'll hang out with you, and they'll make you feel good about it, you know. It's really awesome.
That sounds really, really incredible.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get connected with them? Was it through your photography that you found out about them?
I went to high school with one of the girls that runs it. Her name's Emily Raffinson. She and I have always been good friends, and she's one of the people that taught me how to take photos. And she featured me in the first one with some photos that I took of her skateboarding a couple of years ago. And that's how, when they first put out the first one, that's when the community really got started. Before that, there was just like this girl sesh night every week at the Edge. And that's how it kind of started. That's where they got the idea. They're like, this is a great community for everybody to get to know each other and stuff like that. And they're like, well, we should start a zine. We should start like an official little group, you know, like a skater group. And yeah.
Awesome. Oh, go ahead, Isaac.
Oh, nice. I just wanted to talk about, do you think that finding a community within like the sports space, you know, in your case, skating, even if you do it recreationally, kind of, and one that's comfortable with your gender identity, kind of helped you? And can you say that for sure? Like, and with that in mind, do you think that other people who might be navigating the gender spectrum outside of the rigid binary kind of need, or if they may not have like an outlet or a space within, like in any sport recreationally, do you think that it could kind of be detrimental? And kind of how, like can you just talk a bit about the importance of having a space where you actually feel like accepted in this sports space?
Yeah, for sure. If I think if Girls Sesh a few years ago hadn't been a thing, I don't think I would have gotten back into skateboarding, because I hadn't been into it since I was like a little kid. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been gotten back into it, because I wouldn't go to a random skate park and try and skateboard like really badly in front of like, you know, a bunch of dudes who are super good at it, because it's really intimidating, and I'd feel like I was being judged, even though, you know, they're probably great guys and they don't care, but you know, it's still pretty intimidating. And then yeah, I think it's a great group, and I think that the fact that it's like, it's women, non-binary, trans people, you know, it's for everybody who wants to come. It's for people who aren't just skateboarding, it's for people that rollerblade and do trick, it's for people that do scooters, you know, it's completely inclusionary. So it's, I think without that, there's lots of people in like the city, and lots of younger girls, like there's like a lot of like 16-year-old girls that are just learning to skateboard that come and hang out with them to teach them. And I think without that, lots of these people wouldn't be getting into skateboarding and wouldn't be getting into rollerblading, you know, like, because they wouldn't have a place to go and learn it without feeling judged, you know. And I think that, yeah, I think without finding a community that you can feel involved in and feel included in, I think it's like really detrimental to whether or not you want to be part of a sport or not. Because like, if you don't feel comfortable with what you're doing or who you're doing it with, you're not going to feel like you can do it. You know, it completely stops you from wanting to go and wanting to participate. Yeah. So I think that's really important. And I know it's like not super thought about, but yeah, there's lots of trans people who would love to do sports, but they can't, because if you're on hormones, and then you're considered you're cheating, or you're not in the same class, I guess. So it is pretty detrimental to feeling like they can be included and feeling like they can participate. Yeah.
So would you advocate for there being more kind of spaces exclusively for trans people and people just outside the gender binary, even in traditional sports like basketball and or football, or would you do you think that would kind of be detriment, kind of counterintuitive to the goal of kind of having like equal footing in the leagues and whatever like that?
I feel like both can exist at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like having a trans team would be really cool, but also being included in regular gendered sports would be also awesome, because that's just what sports are. Like, oh, if you have like a physical attribute to yourself that makes you better at basketball, that's just like part of the game, you know? Like, somebody's 6'7" doesn't mean that's what they're born with. They're better at the game that way. That's why they play basketball, you know? So it's I feel like it doesn't matter if you're on hormones or if you're not, like, you know, gender hormones. I feel like that you should be able to be involved in the sport that you want to be, on the team that you want to be. You know, if you're good enough, I think that that's just part of the game. And if somebody has a physical advantage on you, that's part of sports, you know? That's why you play sports. You want to best somebody that's better than you.
I think you bring up a really interesting point that nobody would bat an eye to an 8-foot tall basketball player. Nobody would bat an eye at like an incredibly fast, biologically born man. But all of a sudden, you add, you know, these you just add gender identity, and people all of a sudden want to start limiting what others can do. And I think it comes from a place of intimidation. It comes from a place of ignorance, of not knowing exactly what constitutes gender identity. And I think it's a confusion of the entire sex and gender conversation. People, we use it all the time and we're all guilty of it. We conflate sex and gender in conversations, but really there is a difference. And this difference it becomes increasingly blurred when we talk about sports. And it's wrongly attributed to people's skill level and talents.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think like, yeah, it is a lot of ignorance, because, you know, like lots of people that are super into sports, like that watch it, can be people that aren't super, I guess, like politically correct, I guess, right? So they hear about somebody who isn't cis playing a sport, and it becomes like a whole political debate, and it becomes a whole thing. And because of that, lots of national sports, they kind of shy away from it because they don't want to lose their funding, they don't want to lose their fans, they don't want to worry about that type of stuff. But it's really not that big of a deal. It's just people playing sports, you know. If they're good enough to play on the team, they should be able to play, you know. It doesn't really matter what they look like, or, you know, if they're cis or trans. Like, it's the whole point of sports. If you're good enough, you should play, and you should be able to compete and try and best everybody else.
Yeah, so I guess my next question is, so we talked about the barriers to entry to sports for trans and non-binary folks. What would you think, or what would you say is a barrier of, I guess, maintaining participation, of staying within sports, that you see for non-binary and trans people?
Staying in, like continuing to play?
Yeah, like throughout their lives.
I guess like the main one would just be exclusion, uncomfortableness. I think it would just mainly be feeling like they don't belong, and feeling like starting to feel like an other rather than just like part of the team, you know. And it's hard to feel like part of the team when you are realizing how different you are, and when it's not like talked about, you know. Because when I was younger, I wasn't sure of who I was because it wasn't talked about, because I didn't know what I was, because I didn't know what it was. So I think it's partially like not education, and it's partially just exclusion and feeling like another, you know?
So in what ways does the other skaters kind of make their spaces visually appealing to trans and non-binary folks, and to other people who just might be questioning, people with queer identities? Because you mentioned how, seeing a bunch of guys playing in a skate park, no matter how nice they are, it looks intimidating to many people. So how does the other skaters visually appeal to the group that they're trying to relate to?
Okay, yeah, sure. They advertise a lot. They advertise a lot online and on Instagram and on Twitter and stuff like that. They advertise a lot about like what the next meetup is, who can come, and it's always very inclusionary language. It's always anybody, everybody. It's doesn't matter who you are. It's always, if you're queer, please come. If you're trans, please come. If you're non-binary, please come. It's always, we want anybody and everybody to come, and they always stress that it doesn't matter your skill level. They always really stress that, and they're always very clear about that. And Emily, one of the girls who runs it, she teaches skateboarding for her summer job. That's like what she does during her summer. She teaches people how to skateboard. So she's really good at teaching, and she's always very willing to stop, doing tricks and stop going around, and she's willing to come over and be like, this is how you ollie, or you're doing this a little bit wrong, move your foot this way. It's always a very welcoming, and it always seems more community based. It's less of a rip around and more of a gathering in a way. I don't know how exactly to explain it, but it feels like a gathering rather than a sesh in general.
So when you took photos for the other skaters and their Zine, right? Zine. I'm like second guessing myself now. Zine. Okay, yeah, because I'm like, it's magazine, but I feel like I said that the entire time, but I guess I didn't. Magazine, zine, whatever. When we took photos for the zine, how were you trying to capture the essence of the other skaters and what it was trying to represent?
Okay. Well, actually, the photos I took for the other skaters happened a couple years before the group formed. So me and Emily decided that we wanted to take some photos of them skateboarding, and we went out at night and we just took photos of them at an empty skate park. And I used a milk bottle flash and a disposable film camera, and I just took photos of them ripping around. And I was basing it on a song that I really liked at the time, which was by the Front Bottoms. And I was basing it on that energy. And we just took photos like that. And it was just like for fun, really. And the photos we've just always liked them, and we still like them. So we use them all the time still. And it wasn't to do necessarily with the other skaters. It was more so just wanting to take photos for fun, but they're still good photos and we still use them. And people seem to like them, so they work.
Okay. Sorry, I have a question, and this just draws back to more into organized sports space. So do you think that organizations as a whole should just like fully commit to being more inclusive by really just like ripping off the band-aid in a way, or do you think it needs to be more of a slow transition through educational programs, or do you think like that will only lead to like false platitudes and kind of like, or should it just be more of a direct, we're doing this and we're changing things this way, and over time things will just kind of adapt to a new norm?
That's interesting. Well, if you think about it, like it's already like a topic of conversation with like the Olympics and stuff like that, right? Like wasn't last year there was like a trans person who was trying to compete, but they weren't allowed to because they were on hormones or something like that. I feel like that happened. But I think it would be interesting if it happened at the same time, if there was much more education about trans people and what our transition looks like, because most people don't know what that is. Most people don't know what we go through to transition. Like they just assume, or it's like not talked about. It's just taboo a little bit. I think it would be interesting if at the same time people were far more educated on trans people and their transitions, And also at the same time, it was less of a controversial topic for people to even just try out for the teams, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure if somebody tried out for the WNBA, like a trans woman tried out for the WNBA, she'd get in and it would just be a teammate, you know? And I'm sure there's lots of trans people from trans women from everywhere that would love to compete. I'm sure there's lots of trans men from everywhere that would love to compete. So it wouldn't be uneven scales thing. It would just be like everybody's got one, you know? And I don't think it needs to be such a big topic, because I don't think it would be all that different if trans people were on the teams. I think it would just be a normal team, and everybody has somebody on their team that's like a really good player, you know, that's their star player. Every team has one of those. I don't think it's all that different. And I would love to see more education in general about trans people, because there's none really in schools. There's nothing, none in sex ed, none in biology. It's just not talked about.
Definitely. And I think that's another barrier to access of sports, is just the misinformation that surrounds the entire, kind of community. Organizations are made up of people, and if those people aren't educated, then they can't make informed decisions and, be as inclusive as maybe they want to be. So I think that's a space where everybody can grow and benefit from, is just how, get educated. So I guess that brings me to my next question is, what would your advice be to trans, questioning and other members of the two-spirited LGBTQ plus community, if they wanted to join sports or be involved in an organization that maybe wasn't as inclusive as the other skaters?
Well, I personally have never done it, not since high school, so I'm not super knowledgeable on the subject, but I'd say that if you were trying to do that, you'd be very courageous, and that you just have to be patient, and that eventually things are going to be a bit more normal in terms of us being involved in sports. And if you're willing to take the time to be on the team that you're not really supposed to be on, and you're willing to hone your skills and stuff like that, then it's going to only get better, you know?
How would you recommend they might deal with some, just the comments and maybe the hesitancy of some people? How can they push through that? How can they ignore those types of comments and just, because unfortunately they have to deal with that, whereas other people can just focus on playing the sport. They have to focus about really maintaining some of their sanity. Yeah. So how would you recommend they do that?
I think that even if you're not playing sports as a trans person, you do receive those comments anyways, you know, and just about what you're doing in general, or like what you're involved in general. So I think that most trans people come with a pretty thick skin for that type of thing, and it's an expected part of your life. So it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think that as a community, we're pretty strong and we're pretty good at dealing with that type of stuff. So I think that the best thing I could say is just stay patient, and it'll only get easier, and that it doesn't really matter what anybody else says. You know, it happens all the time. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. So it's just something that you kind of learn to deal with, and you kind of learn how to get stronger from it.
Definitely. Yeah, so anything positive you want to highlight about like gender diversity, trans inclusion in sports, like what's going on right now that you really want to like put out there? This is positive, there's hope.
Damn, the hesitancy.
Let me think.
Maybe the other skaters, and if they have like any upcoming events.
They have another zine drop. The other skaters have another zine dropping in. It just dropped this week, and you can pick it up anywhere at any local skate shop. You can go onto their Instagram and ask to order one to your house. There's free delivery within Winnipeg. It's so that's really fun. And as soon as stuff goes down from Code Red, there'll be more meetups, I'm sure. But right now it's a little bit on pause because COVID rules. But as soon as things clear up again, I'm sure there will be much more meetups. In the summer, usually there's one once a week, and it's really fun. So
Thank you so much for chatting with us today and for talking about your experiences and for just sharing your knowledge with us. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you today. Thank you so much.
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.